Welcome to the Behavioral Health Best Practices Podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Streeter. Today's program will feature CHOW, which stands for Culinary Hospitality Outreach Wellness. CHOW is a peer-based nonprofit mental health and wellness support group for people who work in food, beverage, and hospitality. They hold multiple weekly group discussion meetings online and in person, offer classes in workplace wellness, and provide mental health resources. Visiting with us today is Chief Growth Officer Jasmin Parks-Papadopoulos to share with us the work that CHOW does for the food, beverage, and hospitality industry. Jasmin, welcome to the program, and thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Okay. CHOW is a really interesting organization, started right here in the greater Denver area. Why don't you give us a little background on how it got started and kind of where you guys are today?
Absolutely. We are coming up on our 7th birthday this summer, and we started out in Denver, Colorado. Our founder, John Hinman, who still owns and operates Hinman Pies, wonderful, wonderful guy, started CHOW as a result of his own recovery journey. He was a hospitality worker who left the industry to begin this recovery journey. And when he returned to the industry, he saw that so much of his struggle was still looking back at him in his peers and in his coworkers, and he felt moved to create a supportive environment where folks were able to talk about what he called then the pain that you can't see. How do we address the pain that you can't see? And so he invited folks to come to his bakery on a Monday night, and he asked them, how do we talk about this pain that we can't see? In that initial meeting, they wrote the foundation of our CHOW preamble, which we still read at our CHOW meetings today. They wrote our temperature take, which is how folks at CHOW check in with one another. CHOW is here to improve the lives of food, beverage, hospitality workers through shared story, skills, and resources. And we check in with vocationally specific language. So we do a temperature take, checking in with each other on a scale of rare to well done. Out of respect for the fact that we know that industry workers are often going to have more words for food than they have for their feelings. And so a lot of CHOW's foundation was written in that night, in that initial meeting. And what could have been a sparsely attended, very small meeting in Denver, Colorado, ended up being a very largely attended meeting because, as it were, Anthony Bourdain completed suicide a couple of days before that meeting. And so that was the cornerstone of CHOW. Shortly after, our CHOW CEO, Aaron Boyle, was involved out of Boulder, Colorado. Then I followed from Colorado Springs, Colorado. And the more people kind of joined in, the more CHOW groups started popping up throughout Colorado. And the pandemic afforded us the incredible privilege to be able to move our programming online. And so all of our CHOW discussion groups that still exist today, not just one, but many, with dedicated spaces for men and women. In Spanish, we are announcing shortly an LGBTQ plus meeting as well, our hybrid meetings. So they happen in person, they happen online. And this happens largely out of respect for the fact that we want to meet folks where they are. We want this mental health resource to be accessible to them. So we started off with the meetings, and then we realized that in our industry, there was a need for education. We pride ourselves on being a listening organization, and we heard overwhelming feedback that there was a need for education. And so we wrote what we call the Mental Health Amuse course, which is a 4-hour course that talks about issues affecting workplace wellness, ranging from being able to identify how mental health and recovery from substance misuse show up in our industry specifically, assertive communication, the 8 ingredients of wellness. And so we offer this education as a way to empower food, beverage, hospitality workers with information and resources so that we can create a sustainable workforce. Coupled with that, we also have social initiatives. We have an incredible wealth of resources on our website because we want folks to receive the type of support that they are looking for, whether CHOW has developed that internal support through programming or not. So everyone at CHOW can get you connected to the best next place if we don't have programming to support you. And that's largely how the organization has grown in the last 5 or 6 years. We started off with one small group, and now we are a very large and growing international community offering support to food, beverage, hospitality workers.
This is a peer style group. In other words, all of you that actually interact with people in need of your services, you have your own stories. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about the peer-to-peer approach?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Everyone who works at CHOW, volunteers at CHOW, is either still currently working in the industry in some capacity or has worked in the industry. We want folks to be able to speak and offer support from a place of shared lived experience. I was an executive chef myself for 15 years. The CHOW CEO, Aaron Boyle, also an executive chef. We have wonderful expos, is what we call the folks who moderate the conversations in our room. That stands for Experienced Peer Offering Support. They go through an awesome expos training. They attend other meetings. They have internal supports at CHOW where they meet with an expos supervisor who is able to offer them support and mentorship so that they can unpack the conversations that are happening at their meetings, receive feedback about how they are moderating their meetings, be able to train and retrain on best practices in the peer support world.
What do you think is the biggest contributing factor that is in your industry?
I think that there are multiple contributing factors. I think the food, beverage, hospitality industry, especially as we refer to the back of the house, is built on the military brigade system, right? So this idea of hierarchy, as it were, which does not facilitate conversations, from the bottom up. So it can be incredibly challenging to talk about mental health concerns in any industry. And then when you have a culture in which it is encouraged to check your stuff at the door when you show up for work, because you are framed as the person who is responsible for facilitating a memory, a very special moment for somebody who might be coming into your restaurant or to the hotel that you are working at. It leads to this long-term idea of, the abnegation of self. Couple that with a very, very strong history of disincentivizing self-care, right? We know that there are so many kitchens still in which folks accept that working under a very famous or prestigious chef comes with lower pay, for example. And so what you would be lacking in finance, you would be making up with in experience, an incredibly high turnover rate, which doesn't do much for the long-term psychological safety of folks who are in a workplace, because it can be so easy to leave a job and find another. And then, this general idea that most food, beverage, hospitality workers are gig workers, right? So there's not a lot of professional and personal development investment happening in those employees, because there's this general idea that folks are doing this as a part-time job or as a way to complement their hours. But we know that isn't true. And often what we find when we consider the incredibly long hours, the disconnected periods of work, because the hospitality industry does have seasons in which it goes from being incredibly busy with so many shifts and so much work that you barely know what to do with yourself. And then there will be a really slow period, which makes it hard for you to line up your finances, to make sure that you're practicing good self-care, to make sure that you're checking in with yourself and others around you when things can be so seasonal and go from high to low so very quickly. All of these things contribute to these challenges. On top of that, most folks in the food, beverage, hospitality industry work atypical hours. They're not working a 9 to 5. So the access that they might have to therapy or even just their circle of friends to be able to check in with more regularly is not going to be the same as with someone who's working a 9 to 5 job. So when you stack all of those contributing factors against the fact that it is already so challenging to start having a conversation centered around mental health, it is almost a recipe for disaster. And we know that, we rated #1 in substance misuse out of any industry. We can surmise that that's probably because our work hours are so conducive to substance misuse. There are wonderful chefs, amongst them one whose name is Greg Baker, who wrote about the quiet hour. And he asked the very impactful question: what happens when your restaurant closes down at 11 o'clock or at midnight and the restaurant spits you out into the world where the only thing that is open is the neighborhood dive bar and everyone you know and love is asleep, and there is nowhere to unpack the dysfunction and the escalation and the dysregulation of the shift that you just went through? So this is why we aim to offer supportive spaces for folks to talk about their successes and struggles with their peers who get it, because they have that additional lens of shared experience of understanding these challenges that we uniquely face. And if I'm speaking from personal experience, I can say that when I was in the food, beverage, hospitality industry and I left as a product of the Great Resignation, the better my career was doing, the more accolades I was receiving, the more I was noticed for being a go-getter, the first person to clock in and the last person to clock out, the worse my mental health was doing. Because I was feeling an incredible rate of anxiety about my performance, a fear about the bottom line and food costs, and how do I support my team, and how do I keep the lights on, and how do I make sure that I'm performing well. And so I was showing up not thinking about myself as a person at all. I was clocking in ahead of everyone, leaving all my stuff at the door, and being a high performer when I was at work. And then when it was time to take off my chef coat and go home, my life was unsustainable. And I had no skills with which to cope with myself and the things that I was going through, no language to name any of the challenges that I was experiencing, and no community to take that to.
Well, I want to congratulate CHOW for the wonderful work you guys do. You really found a need and you aggressively went after fulfilling that need. And I think that's an amazing approach to an issue that, again, unfortunately, gets short shift in some cases. Again, keep up the great work. So, Jasmin, you have any final thoughts for us today?
If you are someone, or you know someone, or you love someone, or you value someone in the food, beverage, hospitality industry, or if you are just interested in how you can become an ally to our community, I encourage you to share our resource, come to a CHOW meeting, try one out for yourself and recommend it to someone that you think it might benefit. Oftentimes the best thing that we can do for the communities that we occupy, I believe, is trying out a resource and telling the folks around us what it feels like, what we loved about it, what we learned in the process of trying out a resource. And I think that, in this particular climate in which we don't know how accessible mental health services are going to be within the next couple of years, and what funding is going to look like for nonprofits, it is going to be incredibly impactful for folks to identify systems of community care and to be able to interact with them consistently so that they are supporting themselves and others and showing up for their communities. So I would encourage anyone who's listening, first and foremost, to take care of yourselves and take care of your communities. And second, to check us out and talk about our community, try our community out and talk about it if you feel passionately about it.
Jasmin, thanks so much for being with us today and sharing all this wonderful information about CHOW. And I hope you'll come back and visit with us again.
Absolutely. I hope folks will tune in to hear more from our future collaboration. It's been a pleasure to be with you today, and I'm excited to come back soon and talk about what's in the works. Thank you.
Be sure to visit the CHOW website, chowco.org, for more information about the organization and to download a PDF of their services. Thanks for being with us for this edition of the Behavioral Health Best Practices Podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Streeter, and I hope you visit us again for future podcasts.